Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazo.
Good day. Happy New Year, friends. God bless you. Thank you so much for tuning in, for sharing the podcast. What an amazing year. Actually, we just started last September, but wow. It's just, in fact, you know what? I want to thank some friends. I've got John Haller coming up. We're going to talk about Bible prophecy and a lot of important issues and how Christians can respond to them. But I want to thank some friends who I didn't get a chance to thank yet that have been donating to Worldview Matters. We're a nonprofit. And John and Rachel from Cody, Wyoming. God bless you guys. Thank you and Happy New Year. Jeannie Negro from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Alan Butterworth from Kent, Washington, and Michael Hedman, San Diego, California. So we're moving up in the world. We've got Wyoming, Washington now, New Mexico, Georgia, Wisconsin, New York, Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota, Virginia, Iowa, South Carolina. And I'm going to bug John Haller because I don't see Ohio on the list. Anyway, John is with Fellowship Bible Chapel. He's been on many times with us. Good to have you back, brother. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, David.
All right, so I'm going to get to that. What's going on in Ohio? Why don't we hear from people in Ohio? But I want to, first of all, mention to people to go to your Fellowship Bible Chapel YouTube channel, and that's FBC, Fellowship Bible Chapel, and subscribe to your prophecy updates. So, John, right out of the gate, we're going to talk about Israel, the Middle East, the UN, and all things that are happening geopolitically. But what the heck happened with the vote in Ohio when they're supporting murdering the preborn in mothers' wombs? What's going on? I thought Ohio was kind of like I don't know, it used to be a red state. Give us your perspective.
Well, it's largely a red state except for the urban areas, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland.
But that's the population.
In Toledo's, yeah. But the outlying county, it's much like the rest of America. It's the urban areas that lean Democratic. It's the outlying areas that lean Republican. So I live in Delaware County, which is just north of Columbus. It's been for a while one of the fastest growing counties in the country. And with all the big tech investment, which is probably going to end up being about $150 billion over the next 5 years of construction costs. Wow. That's going on in Licking County to the east of us, but a lot of people are moving up here. And so we have construction all over the place. It's really kind of unbelievable. They're telling us we need 70 to 80,000 new homes. But the problem, David, is that in the tech industry, it's not people who have a biblical worldview.
Yep.
So last spring, the Republicans saw this coming, and they thought, while we have the ability to restrict abortions in Ohio, it was a heartbeat law. So essentially, up to 6 weeks, you could get an abortion. And it passed. We have veto-proof majorities in both the House and Senate, and a guy who claims to be Republican, Michael DeWine. As they say, don't vote for DeWine. Maybe the DeWine has passed its age. Former senator. He's in his 70s now. He's a nice guy, but and he's from Cedarville, so he's down in that area. But the Republicans thought they could get this through. So what they did was they wanted to put in place a constitutional amendment. We have one of those referendum statutes, or referendum part of the Constitution, that if you get enough signatures from each voting district or county, you can get a initiative put on the ballot, which it gets a yes or no vote. And you can change the Constitution that way. And right now you can do it with 50.00001% would approve it. So the Republicans tried to get it to where you had to have 60%. And I think that's good because, the federal Constitution, you have to have 2/3 majority of the states or whatever the constitutional convention that might be had to change the U.S. Constitution. So changing the state constitution should be a very big deal. Well, that thing was passed, and it was, and so to vote for it, you had to vote yes on issue 1 last spring. It failed. It lost like 68% to 32%.
Now that's the people. The people spoke.
Yeah, that they did, and a lot of it was because the thing was worded very broadly. It wasn't worded that well, and so when that amendment went down, well, I'm sorry, the ad campaign attacked it like, oh, they're coming for us, they're coming for women, and all this other stuff. And so when that lost, then the left immediately, and we knew this was what was going to happen. This was what everybody who knew anything about the constitutional amendment part, if it fails, they are coming in with abortion on demand.
Yeah.
And it's going to be worded and it was worded very badly. Now, the Attorney General of the state of Ohio, Rick Yost, who's a good Christian guy, he's challenging it in court, but given the composition of the courts anymore, and I graduated from law school in 1980, and it was bad enough then, let alone what it's like now with all the wokeification that goes on in the law schools. So it came in and it essentially said abortion on demand up through the time of birth. That's what will be allowed. And so the heartbeat law is probably going to go away in the state of Ohio. And there are other states. I think Texas has their referendum thing to change the Constitution, requires a 60% vote in favor of the new amendment or the changes to the Constitution. But now we're at 50.0001. You get one more vote than the majority into the majority, and you win. And it was and so here, even in my county, which is a red county, law considered a harbinger of how well the Republicans are going to do in the state of Ohio because they get such a big majority here.
Wow.
That what I would call the abortion amendment. So now so in the spring, you had to vote yes on issue 1 to prevent them from changing the Constitution. In the fall, then it became you had to vote no on issue 1 to prevent them from changing the Constitution. So it was very confusing to a lot of people. I think that was intentional.
Yep.
And in my county, which is a long red county, Delaware County, it was about 65% in favor of the abortion amendment.
Wow. And so Ohio used to lean red, right? And
right.
So is that changing?
Well, Kansas was always red, except for the urban areas and the university towns where Kansas and Kansas State are. So they had an abortion amendment or referendum or something last fall, and it passed like 70% to 30%. That's Kansas.
Huh.
So in the spring, so this was one of the big deals of the year, David, was the vote to overturn Roe versus Wade and the Casey versus Planned Parenthood decisions. And I remember Roe had been decided just a little bit before I started law school. And I remember my left-wing constitutional law professor at Indiana University saying, this is a stupid decision. It stinks. It's not constitutional. It's terrible. It needs to be overturned. Well, it took 50 years. So the problem that we had was 50 years of this being drummed down people's throat that abortion on demand was okay and it was the way to go. And it shows that what happened. I did an interview last week with John Loeffler. I don't know if you know John.
Steel on Steel. He used to do that show. Yeah.
He's kind of retired, but mutual friend hooked us up, and it was a fascinating thing. But we talked about essentially what you would call, Gramsci and all these guys coming over and setting up these things in the universities at Columbia and other places. The long march through the institutions, Dewey and others. And I have a friend who's a close friend of Patrick Wood's, and they've written on it quite a bit. And they talk about, this really started in the late 1800s, and then the Dulles brothers came in. And they just said, this is not going to change in our lifetime. So we're going to march through the institutions, push technocracy, push Marxism, push socialism, push communism. I think Loeffler said the difference between a communist and a socialist is the communist has guns. And otherwise, they're pretty much united ideologically. So it really came through the technocracy movement came through largely Columbia University and some of the Ivy League schools. And, one of the big proponents of technocracy was a guy from Columbia named Zbigniew Brzezinski. who was a national security advisor under Carter, but also a guy that was involved in that was a guy named Henry Kissinger, who just, within the last couple of weeks went to his eternal reward, hoping, I think it's okay to hope that he gets what he deserves,
Wow.
or that he doesn't get what he deserves. That would be a better hope.
Yeah.
But he died at the age of 100, and he was really very destructive to a lot of U.S. foreign policy and relationships with China and that type of thing. So this has been a long march through the institutions. And I said in the spring, listen, we win, Roe is overturned, Casey versus Planned Parenthood is overturned, but that's not the end of it. That doesn't mean abortion is outlawed. That means it's a fight in the trenches on a state by state basis. And so we were never going to win the left coast and the East Coast.
Right.
Those were going to go pro-abortion, Washington, Oregon, California. But here in the middle, you thought, well, we had a chance. Well, Kansas seems to have caved, and now Ohio. And it's a very troubling thing that I think we see happening. So, but I do think that was really one of the biggest stories of 2023. We are in a cultural war.
Yep.
I don't think this changes till the Lord gets back. I don't think so. With the way Ohio went, I told people I think that what happens in Ohio on this amendment is a harbinger of the fall election in 2024, assuming we have one.
Yes.
And so I'm not particularly optimistic the way it's going, even though you've got probably the weakest candidate in the history of the United States running for the Democrats.
Yeah, and by the way, I hope the rest of America, the other states, at least the red states, so-called, learn from what happened in Ohio. And by the way, the money, it's just unbelievable how much money that Planned Parenthood, they got a raise since the Biden administration came in, and they're getting more money. So just because Roe v. Wade was overturned, they are now ramping it up. They're ramping up their game on the left. When we come back with John Haller, we're going to talk about rising persecution of Christians and incredible levels of anti-Semitism and what's happening worldwide. We'll get into some of that and what we can learn from last year on Worldview Matters.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbinger's Daily, world news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com.
So, John Haller, what happens in the UK doesn't stay in the UK. And we already know people are getting arrested in America for certain things that we never expected 50 years ago. But over in the UK, there's a new court case. A judge decided it's okay to criminalize prayer and reading from the Bible if you're in a buffer zone surrounding an abortion clinic. And tell us about this. And I know there's an article over at Hot Air as well. Being Christian is becoming illegal in the UK, and that's growing around the world. So, John, tell us your thoughts, and where do you think this is headed?
Well, I do think, and I noticed the sponsor of your program is Harbinger's Daily, which I do read on a weekly basis, by the way. And so I approve of their mission, and they note this, you note this on your program all the time. This is a cultural war that we're in, and abortion is sort of the tip of the spear, I guess, on everything. So in the UK, I remember seeing the videos of this lady. She was standing outside an abortion clinic with her head bowed, and they came and they are you praying? And she goes, well, I'm praying in my spirit. And they arrested her.
Praying silently.
The same thing is happening here in the United States. If you remember back in Philadelphia, there was a group of Christians who went and prayed outside an abortion clinic. They weren't blocking access to anything.
That's right.
They weren't yelling and screaming at the women who were going on in to get abortions. And by the way, it's a time when people are really struggling that I think they need to have full information about the decision that they've made. I have a very good friend who's a very well-known pastor, and his granddaughter was adopted because the mother was stopped by someone a Christian who said, "You look like you're having problems." She was on her way to have an abortion clinic. She had like 3 other kids in the car. She gave up the child for abortion, and now this beautiful young lady is this pastor's oldest granddaughter. And so this is an important time. So in America, they were praying outside the abortion clinic, not blocking anybody, and they were arrested by this. I don't know. I don't really know how else to say it. Is this criminal Biden administration? And the Justice Department has been weaponized. And if you remember, one of the guys who has 7 or 8 kids, they sent a SWAT team to his house at 5 a.m. in the morning.
Yep.
And they show up with long rifles pointing at the kids and all this other stuff, and they arrest him. He went to trial, by the way, and he was found not guilty in 15 minutes. Now, I'm a trial lawyer by training, and I can tell you that just to get the jury back to the room, to make sure they have everything in the room, and to figure out, the order of things like who orders the coffee and who goes to the bathroom first, that takes at least 15 minutes. So if they're coming back with the verdict in 15 minutes, it means the defense did not prove its case. But then they went against some of the other people, or 7 or 8 of them, and they were found guilty. And I think in Philadelphia, and one of them was this woman who had been arrested in this sort of this SWAT style raid. She's an 85-year-old grandmother.
Yeah.
And now she faces up to 11 years in prison.
In America.
In America.
Yep.
America with a K.
Yeah.
And so, David, that's another big story of the year. So there's persecution of Christians, and I think it's coming. And what we see now, we can argue whether you like the way he conducts himself all the time, President Trump, but President Trump is kind of out there on the leading edge with what I would call the lawfare that's being put out against Christians.
Yeah.
And they're coming up with, I am telling you, David, I've been a lawyer for a long time. And sometimes as a lawyer, you have to go into court to defend your client, take kind of a ridiculous position. And try to sound confident about it. It's just the way our system works. But the stuff they're doing to Trump in New York and elsewhere on some of these things, it's clearly election interference.
Yep.
But you can't call it election interference, even though it is election interference. And so, and it's very, very expensive. So they charge, like in the disputes over the 2020 election, a lot of lawyers that represented Trump got charged. A lot of them have pled guilty just because they were being bankrupted. I mean, it cost hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in attorney's fees. And I'm not griping about attorney's fees. As an attorney, I love attorney's fees, particularly big ones. But it's bankrupting people to defend themselves in court, because you lose, you don't get or you win and you're found not guilty, you don't get your money back. You're bankrupt. So we see this case right now against Rudy Giuliani from a couple of the election officials in Georgia. And they said, well, Giuliani defamed us. So I don't know if you heard about this. This case went to trial.
Yeah.
And the judge said, you defamed them. You don't get to put any defense.
Jeez.
And if you say anything, I'm going to hold you in contempt. And so the way you calculate damages is, you have to, what did you lose? So let's say you lose your job, and you're making $50,000 a year, and you're going to lose your job for 20 years, you can calculate what the present value of that loss is. These election people in Georgia were awarded, and by the way, they didn't try the case in Georgia. They filed the case in Washington, D.C., because, that's where you're going to get the most unfair jury against somebody like Giuliani or Trump. The verdict was $148 million. Now, wow. David, I did some medical malpractice and personal injury stuff, and I would have cases occasionally where I was defending a company that was alleged to have done something that resulted in somebody being a quadriplegic who required round-the-clock nursing care for the rest of their lives. And in those cases, 20 years ago, you could put $20 million in damages on the board. You could count, and I just don't understand how you get $146 million. So this is what I think people need to understand is, and again, one of the biggest stories of the year, they're not just coming for former President Trump. They're coming for all of us if we disagree. They have set up, and I guess this would be a related another big story of the year, is the way they've weaponized the technology against people that disagree with them.
Yes.
They've set up these organizations that track what you say, and they're able to go in and they're able to get you banned from social media. I mean, look, how many years have we been talking about the fact that, if you say the wrong thing on YouTube, Google will shut you down. And it's very interesting. And we'll talk, I think, in another program maybe about AI. But
yeah, you know what, John? Can I interject something here?
Sure.
You're absolutely right, and they've been doing that to Christians and conservatives already for almost a decade. The first interview that I had last year, the first interview for my brand new book, Assault on the Image of God, was with J.B. Hickson. YouTube deleted it. YouTube deleted it within 3 hours. Was
it on your channel or on JB's channel?
The audio was on his was it Apple
podcast.
Or Spotify podcast.
Yeah.
The video was on my YouTube, and they deleted it. They just said it violated community standards. So this is the biblical worldview being censored in America. So yeah, a lot of us understand it's happened to us. Go ahead.
But you could talk about. Well, here's an example of persecution. So with the thing going on in Israel right now, anti-Semitism, and I think you're going to see there's a synergy between anti-Semitism and Christian persecution. They're sort of inextricably woven together.
Yeah.
So as Israel, everybody was a lot of people, most people were in favor of Israel when they first went in, but that changed in a week. Now everybody's coming out against Israel, and we saw this debacle around the 6th, 7th of December in Congress, where the three Ivy League, MIT, Penn, and Harvard presidents, all females, went in and they were asked questions about whether this was anti-Semitism or this was against their policy, and they would not say no. Now, the Penn president has resigned, but remember, it was Penn that had a boy pretending to be a girl swimming in NCAA female swimming events, winning the events, just crushing the opposition.
Yep.
And I would dare say, in fact, I could say with 100% certainty that if I had been on the Penn campus and criticized that as a professor or a student, I would have been expelled as a student or fired as a professor or suspended. And she could not say calling for the genocide of Jews and intifada, which clearly means that, was anti-Semitic.
Jeez.
So it is hypocrisy on an epic scale. I've often said if hypocrisy was water, the world would drown. But I think we're going to see more of this. And I think Christians need to prepare their minds and hearts for this, because I think more persecution is coming. I just don't see how it rolls back at this point.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to Andy Woods tomorrow about the world against Israel, and that being prophetic, actually. But John, we've only got a couple minutes left. Looking back at 2023, obviously the story, October 7th, the demonic attacks by Hamas against Israel, one of the biggest stories in our lifetime, at least of the year. Is there another story or issue that you're concerned about as we are into a new year?
Well, I do think this development of artificial intelligence and where it's going is a very, very big deal. So, and that kind of ties into the Israel thing, because one of the ways to prevent that is artificial intelligence. And so artificial intelligence, though, David, it's going to affect every part of our lives, and it's not going to be rolled back. It's not, nobody is regulating it. They talk about regulating it.
Yeah.
But it's already gone too far. And this ties a lot of end time issues together, I think.
Well, you're talking about digital IDs, social credit scores, stuff that China's doing, really coming to America, rising mark of the beast technology. Any closing thoughts on that, John, before we wrap up?
Well, what we need to understand, I think, when we talk about the culture and we talk about AI has a religion behind it. Yuval Harari 8-9 years ago at Silicon Valley did a speech, and at the beginning of his speech he said, "I love coming to Silicon Valley because it is here that the religions that will control humanity in the 21st century are being created." So everybody has a religion. And so what that tells you and what's going on, I think somebody described the cultural battle over this gender identity thing and the
Yep.
pronouns as a battle for control of the dictionary. And I thought that was very prescient in what they said. So I think it's coming. We just need to understand, like it says in Ephesians chapter 6, that this is a spiritual battle at its core.
Yeah. Amen.
And we need the solution is to put on the whole armor of God. And so it's something you need to do daily as a Christian. And I think we need to expect more of this in the future.
Yes. And as we know, the spiritual forces of darkness, they are moving. And what happens? That materializes in the natural because Satan uses human minions, right? He's got disciples. Like we're to make disciples for Christ. Satan is making disciples for demonic purposes that we are seeing carried out that we never thought we'd see in our lifetime. But John Haller, we're going to do this again next week. We're going to talk about what we can expect as we look ahead in this year. And friends, we've got Andy Woods coming up tomorrow. We're going to talk about how Israel is being attacked and anti-Semitism, all kinds of things with Andy. But Brother John, I want to send people to your Fellowship Bible Chapel YouTube channel. I appreciate all the research you do. I often jokingly say John Haller does all the work, so we don't have to, but I'm joking. I love you, man. We'll talk to you soon, John.
Thanks so much, David. God bless.
All right. Thank you. Friends, again, thank you for your support. And one of the best things you can do next to praying for the show, against the spiritual warfare and the attacks, is to share on social media, because we are a little bit limited, but with your help, we're getting out there. So I want to thank you so much again. God bless you. Happy New Year. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.